We have another huge NHL trade rumor update here for you today, including the Edmonton Oilers shopping for a goalie. We have word that the Leafs are interested in Tyler Bertuzzi of Detroit. We also have word on Vladimir Tarasenko and a potential trade to the Islanders. And we also have a potential package the Rangers might be willing to send for Jack Eichel. We also have updates on the Seattle Kraken, some signings, and more. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a lot of information here today, a lot of big updates on the trade rumor front, so I want to dive in and get started. So this is definitely one of those videos you're going to want to listen close, pay close attention, and watch all the way through because there's a lot of important info that you may miss otherwise. Now, first up, we do get an announcement today from the Seattle Kraken. They've announced their first schedule of preseason games that'll be coming up prior to the upcoming NHL season. They're going to play a series of games throughout the state of Washington in neutral sites. Obviously, they're mostly areas where the WHL has hockey teams like Everett and Spokane, and they will be playing the Vancouver Canucks, the Edmonton Oilers, and the Calgary Flames. So we expect and hope that a rivalry will build between the Canucks and the Kraken, given their geographical proximities, and their very first ever game, even though it's only a preseason game, will be against Vancouver. So that'll be coming up here into the fall ahead of the NHL season. We also got word that the Montreal Canadiens are losing their AHL coach in Joel Bouchard. He has left the organization and accepted the same role with the Anaheim Ducks for their AHL affiliate for the San Diego Gulls. Now, apparently he did have talks with Marc Bergevin about possibly staying in Laval as head coach and possibly joining the Habs as an assistant coach to Dominic Ducharme. I'm not really sure exactly what motivated him to go. I'm assuming here he sees more of an opportunity to get to the NHL as a head coach through Anaheim than Montreal, which is fair to say given the fact that Dominic Ducharme was just appointed interim head coach, likely becomes the full-time permanent head coach here shortly when the interim tag gets removed, which you know is likely going to happen. And it's really hard to say. I mean, obviously he could go as an assistant, but if he thinks he's got a better shot to be head coach in Anaheim sooner than later, makes sense, I guess. However, in Anaheim, things have been going through changes, really. Like Bob Murray changed a couple of assistant coaches for head coach Dallas Eakins here this year. They got some new staff members. I kind of wonder if Dallas Eakins' job might be somewhat on thin ice. Wouldn't be completely shocked if Bob Murray was on thin ice either. I mean, he's been there a long time. I know they're going through a bit of a rebuild right now, but we don't know how ownership feels about everything like that. So you just never know. I mean, if Eakins is on, a short leash, for example, he can then Bouchard might have a faster path to the NHL if that's going to work out for him. But ultimately, we'll see. The York Rangers announced today that they've signed young forward Brett Howden to a one-year deal at $885,000. Howden would have been a restricted free agent had we made it to that point. However, this signing is definitely going to come as a help for the expansion draft. I mean, the Rangers are certainly trying to, I guess, give the Kraken a little bit more options. I think it's fair to say Howden's a player that they wouldn't be too upset losing in the expansion here. So obviously having Howden signed gives an extra option for what's going to be available. He definitely won't be protected from my understanding. Looking at their list, I can't see how that's a likely possibility here. So that's just another option for Seattle. We also got word that the Devils have signed defenseman Jonas Siegenthaler, the Swiss-born defenseman who they acquired from Washington earlier last year. He gets a 2-year contract extension with an average annual value of $1.125 million. Now, again, to me, this is also a signing that looks like it's expansion draft motivated here. Not that they wouldn't have signed them anyways, but getting their signings in order here for a lot of teams is going to be important because they do have exposure requirements to meet. You do have to have a certain number of players at each position available that are signed for at least next season. So some teams don't have that. So New Jersey, for example, had PK Subban, Damon Severson, as well as Will Butcher. So they had their 3 guys that they likely would protect, but they didn't have a 4th guy that they could expose. Now, that 4th guy is Siegenthaler now, but doesn't mean he's going to be exposed. I wouldn't be completely shocked here if the Kraken expose the $9 million man, PK Subban. I doubt the Kraken would want that contract, so it's likely that they could keep Siegenthaler, not lose Subban, and carry on with their D as usual, and likely use a player at a different position here. So obviously we'll see what the Devils do, but I do believe this is another signing that's expansion draft motivated. Now, we do have word as well from Dave Pagnotta of the fourthperiod.com reporting that the Edmonton Oilers are in contract negotiation talks with goaltender Mike Smith to bring him back on another short-term contract. Right now, it looks as though the Oilers have tabled an offer to Smith and his agent. We're waiting on a response, and they believe that's most likely going to be a counter offer that's presented instead of an agreement and a signature. So we'll see here. Obviously, Smith had a really good year for Edmonton, so it makes sense to bring him back and give him another opportunity. Hopefully, he can play more like he did this past season, more so than the year before. He can be a great goalie at times, but he has had his moments of being inconsistent. But largely last year, I must say, he was really good. So I think he deserves another chance. But as I mentioned before in the Edmonton offseason video, I'd like to see the Oilers kind of solidify their tandem a little bit here and take the pressure off Mike Smith. I think early last year they realized they couldn't really play Koskinen a whole lot because he wasn't reliable, wasn't getting the job done. And Smith was really being trotted out there way more than he likely should have been. Come playoff time, wouldn't have been surprised if he was starting to run out of gas. And I don't think they can take that chance. He's going to be another year older. I think he can play well like he did last year. But if he could play less, it probably increases your odds of him being more rested and being able to keep up with a rigorous 82-game schedule, because NHL players haven't had a full 82-game schedule now in 2 seasons. I mean, we played 56 this year. The year before, the season was interrupted in March when things got shut down. Yes, we came back and played playoffs, but there was a massive break in between. So, it's one of those situations that, players are going to have a bit of an adjustment period here. So a guy that's older like Smith is higher risk to either be injured or, to run out of gas or whatever. So I think it makes sense here that they continue looking for another goalie to work with him, because Pagnotta also reported that they have been scouring the goalie market for a trade, which certainly signifies that Koskinen is likely done with the Edmonton Oilers. If they can find a trade for him, great. If not, the buyout period is now open, and he could be a real solid buyout candidate. Makes sense. He's done a 1-year night contract. Either way, I don't see Koskinen returning to the Oilers next season, and they will go with Smith, assuming they can come to terms, which shouldn't be too difficult, and then another goalie that they end up acquiring, likely via trade or free agency, to work with them as their new tandem going into next year. Now, before we jump into the remaining trade rumors, I do want to pause for a moment here and acknowledge our channel sponsor, Manscaped. Top Shelf Hockey is proud to be sponsored by Manscaped. Of course, with Manscaped, we have a special offer here for all Top Shelf Hockey viewers, where you can get 20% off and free shipping on all orders at manscaped.com. Now, of course, Manscaped just launched a brand new Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is a fantastic product. They've taken the level up here, even again with the skin-safe replaceable blades. It's waterproof, it's wireless charging, has a travel lock on it, as well as a nice light so you don't miss what you're doing. So certainly a terrific product. Now, many people associate Manscaped with their trimmers, which is certainly kind of their top product, but they do have a lot of other great options as well, including what they call the Weed Whacker, which is another trimmer for your ears and nose. And they have a variety of deodorants and sprays as well, which also keep you fresh and are terrific as well. So certainly Manscaped has a lot to offer, and we certainly highly recommend all of their products. So check out manscaped.com and use promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. So thanks very much for watching that promotional video. I greatly appreciate it. Also appreciate the support from the sponsor as well. Now, getting back into today's content, I also want to talk about the reports here from Elliotte Friedman about the Toronto Maple Leafs having interest in Red Wings forward Tyler Bertuzzi. Now, Friedman's reporting that the interest in Bertuzzi goes back here a little ways to the NHL trade deadline this past season. Apparently, they were very interested in making the acquisition, but Bertuzzi was not healthy enough and couldn't get the trade done because of that. Hard to say if the trade would have happened if he would have been healthy, but it's certainly a player they were very interested in and keeping a close eye on. And now those interests have kind of peaked back up here, especially if they feel like they're not going to be able to get Zach Hyman signed, which is looking more and more likely that he's going to leave. I mean, Friedman did update that situation as well in a recent radio hit today, talking about that things are not looking good in that regard, and they're already working on basically plan B and C to try to figure out, who could replace Zach Hyman in their lineup. And Bertuzzi, from how he plays and everything, could be a good possible fit there if they can work out a deal. I mean, he is a pending restricted free agent. I don't know for sure that Steve Yzerman and the Red Wings would want to trade Bertuzzi, but we also didn't think they would trade Anthony Mantha, and they did do that. Now, I guess when you look at some of their top players like Larkin and Bertuzzi, and then even when Mantha was there going back to last year before that happened. Like, obviously the Red Wings are far from being a cup contender. This rebuild is taking a long time to shed a lot of the old contracts and to kind of get things moving here in the right direction. And you get to think about it. By the time the team is ready to be more competitive, some of their top guys now are going to be getting into those later 20s. And it's not to say that they can't be good, effective players at that stage, but they might not want to wait around that long to win. It doesn't make sense to have some of them around if they're not going to be competitive for a little while. It's just debatable in some sense. You do have to have some players, obviously, to help the younger guys, learn to be professionals and to grow and have some talented players to play with to continue developing. But, I'm not entirely convinced that they wouldn't trade Bertuzzi. I don't know what kind of return package we're looking at here, but he did make $3.5 million last year, and he only got into 9 games because he was injured. I mean, before that, he had back-to-back 20-goal seasons and put up around 47, 48 points. So, it's likely that Hyman might end up making more than Bertuzzi in this case as well. So they could, get a similar player and end up paying a little bit less. I mean, considering how last year went for Bertuzzi, I'm not really sure he can command a whole lot more money, but they're going to have to be cautious on term because obviously he's not too far away from being an unrestricted free agent. So they'd probably want to eat up at least a couple of those seasons if they can and kind of go from there. Now, obviously, this is something, if it did happen, would likely happen after expansion, given the unique circumstances that Toronto and many teams face with not wanting to lose a player. They're not going to want to bring in a guy and then have trouble keeping him. Obviously, the Red Wings wouldn't have issues like that, and I think that from the Leaf side of things, I wouldn't be shocked if they go with 8 skaters here and just protect the big 4 forwards as well as their top 4D. And then obviously their player they're likely going to lose is probably going to be a forward like a Kerfoot, for example. So they're going to be looking to replace a guy like him too. So the Leafs are going to have a lot of openings on their team. They're not going to have a ton of money to work with. And it makes sense that this could be something they look into. Now, I'm not convinced 100% it gets done. Like I said, I don't know for sure. But it's just interesting to hear from Friedman that this interest is not new. It dates back a ways. And we'll see if they continue to push forward to try to get a Bertuzzi deal done here and bring him to Toronto. Now, of course, as we know as well, Vladimir Tarasenko is getting a lot of attention in the NHL rumor mill. We got confirmation a couple of nights ago, actually during the Stanley Cup Finals, that Tarasenko has officially requested a trade from St. Louis. Now, there's already a lot of talk about where could he end up going. We got more information on that situation today from Dave Pagnotta as well to fourthperiod.com, indicating that from what he's been told is that NHL teams have been inquiring on Tarasenko and looking for access to his medical records, and he believes that they were granted to review them. So that's a good sign if teams are looking into that. It obviously makes sense given his lack of playing time the last couple of years, the shoulder surgeries. I can understand the concern. I would have them myself if I'm going to be an acquiring team, especially with 2 years at $7.5 million cap hit. You want to tread carefully here, and obviously not a surprise here. So obviously St. Louis is being very upfront with everything. It kind of sounds like what we've been told, that the last surgery did kind of clean up the shoulder and fix what hadn't been fixed before. But still, you want to know that he's going to be okay. If he can be healthy and play anywhere near to his capabilities that he was at before, he could be a 30 to 40 goal scorer again. Like, you can't just say, he's been hurt, I don't want him. You never know here. Like, he's still only like 29 years old. It could be a situation where he could still have some real productive years, and he's only on the books for 2 years. I would consider it. Now, the main team right now that I keep hearing he's been linked to is the New York Islanders. Now, the rumored trade would be Tarasenko going to the Islanders. There's even a rumor as well that even a guy like Vince Dunn could be included in this as well, because obviously the young defenseman is likely not playing in St. Louis next year. He could be an expansion draft victim too, so he might not even be available if this deal takes longer to come together, which wouldn't surprise me if it did. So we'll see what happens, but there's rumored about him maybe being in there as well. But the return price was going to be Anthony Beauvillier as well as Jordan Eberle, and likely a prospect or two as well. Now, obviously, when it comes to the $7.5 million cap hit, well, Eberle's making over $5 million. Beauvillier's an RFA, needs to be signed, but he's going to be up around probably at least $3 million or so. I'm not sure exactly what Bo was going to end up making, but between the two incomes between Beauvillier and Eberle, he would end up being as much or more than Tarasenko. Dunn's not going to be able to command a whole lot of money here just yet. So from a financial standpoint, that would kind of offset. So they could make it work strictly from a salary cap perspective. And like I said, there could be some other prospects or draft picks in the mix there as well. I mean, I know that if they do this ahead of time, I know some guys like Bellows, for example, could be appealing to Seattle. So maybe they get something done ahead of time. I don't know, but I would think a Tarasenko trade's probably going to take longer, you'd think, right? Just given the fact that, because of the injuries, teams are going to want to be cautious here. So I don't know. To me, I do agree that the Islanders need another dynamic winger to play with Barzal. I've already been kind of championing the fact that they should try to move Jordan Eberle. So I have no issue with the possibility. Obviously Beauvillier going out kind of hurts a little bit for Islander fans because he's, scored some big goals, been a popular player, but you're getting a potential 40-goal guy. I mean, Anders Lee himself, their captain, is a former 40-goal guy. If they can get back to anywhere near what they used to be playing with a guy like Barzal, that could be a dynamic line for them. It's at least interesting to think about. No guarantees any of it happens. Now, I also saw a quick report as well from Boston Hockey Now and Joe Haggerty kind of lobbying for the fact here that he feels the Bruins could be or should be in on Tarasenko. Didn't really have any intel to suggest they were in on him, but thinking that they should be. He suggested them trading Jake DeBrusk, maybe a first-round pick, as well as a guy like Trent Frederick, who's from the St. Louis area. So that's what he was proposing. Now, those are assets that could be moved anyways. The way I think Boston even considers looking into this is if Hall and Krejci don't re-sign, because that's the only way they're going to be able to even consider from a financial standpoint, being able to afford this, because obviously DeBrusk and Frederick would make a fair bit less combined than Tarasenko. So obviously, I don't think that necessarily gets it done. I think St. Louis might be intrigued by the return there. That is possible. Wouldn't rule that out. But when it comes to Taylor Hall, Elliot Friedman did also mention that, it's possible he does hit free agency. He said that he felt, even as recently here, that it was very likely he re-signs in Boston and still feels there's a decent possibility that's going to happen. But he does mention that there is some word that Taylor Hall might take this to free agency before he ultimately makes that decision. And if there's another offer out there, he just might end up jumping ship here yet again. But if I'm him, I probably think he should stay in Boston because that's some of the best hockey he's played in a few years, and it just seemed to be a good fit. So if you really want to win and have a good shot, why don't you stay where it works? That's my advice to him, but we'll see what he ultimately ends up deciding. Now, lastly here, I want to talk about Jack Eichel quickly. We do have some information to suggest what kind of a package offer might be on the table from the New York Rangers to the Buffalo Sabres in an attempt to land Jack Eichel. Now, we've said all along, it's pretty unlikely that the Rangers would ever want to include some of their top young players like Lafreniere or Kakko. I think a couple other players that very well could find himself being in that somewhat untouchable category would be a defenseman like Nils Lundqvist or a Braden Schneider. No guarantees there, but I think they're pretty high on them to be like part of the future. So the rumored package that the Rangers would be interested in offering for Eichel include a couple of young defensemen like Zach Jones and Matthew Robertson. And the rationale behind that is that they could afford to lose those guys with guys like Lundqvist and Schneider still on the way up. So that's not really a huge loss if they're going to get a top center in return. You throw those two defensemen in there, along with a guy like Pavel Buchnevich. Now, Bucci needs a new contract. Had an excellent year last season. Certainly a pretty solid, good-sized winger. So I think that would have appeal to the Sabres. Of course, a first-round pick would be included in there as well. So the Rangers' first-rounder in 2021 is, like a mid-first round. It's not too high, but it's not too low type of deal. And then you're looking at another roster player on top of that. I don't have confirmation on who that other roster player could be, but my opinion suggests that the other roster player is likely either goaltender Alex Georgiev or possibly a center iceman like a guy like Philip Hedl. I would think they'd want at least one center in return. If you get a winger and a couple of defensemen and a first rounder, I think, a guy like Hedl would become expendable at that point as well, because if you still have a guy like Zibanejad and Strome on the roster, you throw Jack Eichel in the mix, well, obviously you could have Eichel and Zibanejad be your top two. Strome could drop down to be a number three. You're not going to play Hedl on the fourth line unless you try to get him over to the wing, but it's going to get a little crowded there as well. So ultimately, you still got Panarin, you still got Kakko, you still got Lafreniere, you still got Chris Kreider. So I think he would likely be the piece involved. So Buchnevich, Hedel, Robertson, Jones, and a first-round pick that gets them 5 assets for, what they're rumored to be looking for 5 or 6. So to me, that says the Rangers are pretty interested. I'm not really sure they're going to budge too much on that offer from what I've been told. So I think that's a pretty reasonable pitch for Eichel, and we'll see if they end up getting him or if he ends up going elsewhere. They're going to have tough competition from a lot of other teams, but they're definitely interested and in the mix 100%. So that is all your news and rumors here for today. Let me know your thoughts on everything discussed down below in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news and rumors on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.